Welcome to the Playbook presented by the Leaders Lab. I'm Ken Eslick, and if you're a leader or founder who wants to hire top talent, scale your business, and sell for more, you're in the right place. Each week, Onika and I bring you practical, actionable advice that you can put to work immediately to make an impact in your business today. And now, here's this week's episode. Welcome back. Ken Eslick here once again with Onika. Last time we dug into self-leadership, because before you scale a company or a team, you have to scale yourself. And once you start to get that right, a new challenge shows up. You realize you can't grow any further without replacing yourself in key parts of the business. For founders, that might be a head of operations, a head of sales, or a GM who takes the wheel day to day. For enterprise leaders, let's say you're a sales manager or a director inside of a Fortune 500, that could be grooming your ready now successors so you can step into a bigger role. Either way, if this hire isn't in motion, neither is your next level. Onika's been tracking the patterns here, what holds leaders back, and what the best do differently. So I'm going to hand it over to her to set the stage. Welcome back, Onika.
Hi, Ken. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be back. And I have some burning questions for you. So I hope you're ready
I'm ready.
to jump on in. Yeah, awesome stuff. One of the first questions that I kind of had on my mind, because it's applicable whether you're an enterprise leader or a founder. But from your experience, when did you first realize that you needed someone to run a big piece of the business without you?
I'll give you kind of a couple different stages in my career, right? So one was after I got out of the military and we started our first company, I remember it was like, how far can I take this thing by myself? I mean, that was a conscious thing, not just because I didn't want to hire people, but I wanted to make as much money as I could before I took that risk, right? And I remember all of the advice that I got was wrong. Like I found that I could do significantly more than people thought I could, but you can only do so much, right? There's just so many hours in a day. And so I was able to get this nice little business off the ground that made good money, that was relatively, I don't say easy, but I got in a good flow of it, right? And then I had to decide to kind of expand from there and, bring on somebody to do a lot of the activities that I was doing. And that part was very difficult. In the corporate world, my company never really got big enough where I needed like a set of leaders under me. Like I didn't need an ops manager. I didn't need, I could have my frontline folks doing that stuff. But in the corporate world, that became evident like really, really quick. And what I noticed was for those of us, which I think a lot of founders can relate to, that it's your baby, you've grown it, you've done everything, you know how to run the computer systems, you know how to sell it, you know how to talk to the clients, you know how to, giving up control is tough. And I'm not talking about hiring 10 or 20 people even. I'm talking about hiring those people because we have to look in the mirror and say, I'm actually not the best person to run sales for my company, or I'm not the best person to run operations for my company. And that's a very tough realization,
Yeah, absolutely. And when you were talking about that transition, you mentioned it as being very difficult.
Yeah.
What aspect of it do you feel like was the most difficult? Was it the letting go of control? Was it a trust thing? Or for a lot of founders and leaders, I think a lot of their identity is also wrapped up in their business.
Very, very intuitive thought there, Onika. I think it is identity a lot, even though we complain about it, right? You hear a lot of people complaining about, I have to do everything, this place would fall apart without me. When you hear people talking like that, alarm bells should go off. And I'm sure we've all talked like that at one time or another, but that's a sign that they have not hired and or delegated correctly. But it also, to your point, is a big part of their identity that, I'm the one that makes stuff happen. Everything kind of revolves around me. There's a lot of ego in that, right? Even though they're sort of trying to sound as if they're a martyr, there's a lot of ego in that. There's a lot of ego in no one can do what I do, right? That's purely egotistical. Yeah. When you think about it. And so I think it's letting go of that. So I think it's ego. I think it's fear. I think it's not knowing how to train someone to take stuff over. But I can tell you this, Onika, once you unlock it, once you figure out that there are people more qualified than you, or at least equally as qualified as you, to do different things in your business, then once I got it down, then I became just the master delegator. Like everything that came to me, I was like, who else could do this? So I don't have to, But I think it really comes from trust, letting go of your ego, breaking through your identity challenges, and just entrusting that someone else is going to do it. The other part of it is this. I remember early on being a GM in a Fortune 500 company, and I was controlling everything financially. So the budget for sales, the budget for the office, the budget for everything. And it got too big. It got too big to manage all these little individual line items. And so I just started taking sections of it and giving it to the section heads, right? So it'd be like, you're the
Yeah.
office manager, you run this. You're the service manager, you run this. Because they were only running one section and they were all highly capable, they were so much better than I was because they were paying instead of managing, 100 line items, they were managing 10 line items,
Yeah.
and they were smart, right? And so they were able to thrive. The business actually did better that way. And again, I just got hooked on it after that.
Yeah. I think something else that you mentioned, Ken, that really stood out to me is you said something to the effect of sometimes I'm just not the best person to do something.
Yeah.
So once you realize you can't do it alone, the next question becomes who replaces you where it matters most? And what would you say should be the first few thoughts, decisions a founder and leader makes once that has clicked for them?
Well, I think the reason last week, Annika, that we wanted to start with self-awareness is I think equally as important as a financial plan. In fact, I think they go hand in hand is your
Yeah.
succession plan, which is, you know, a lot of founders start a business because they created something really cool. Maybe it's a piece of software, maybe it's an invention, like whatever it might be. That doesn't mean they're great at sales. It doesn't mean they're great at hiring people. It doesn't even mean they're going to be good at leadership, right? But I think if you're aware of those things going in, and every business again has a business plan or should. And so as they're scaling up, they need to know like, ooh, right here, I need to lean into my weakness of whatever it is. And knowing that in advance makes you think about long before you're there, okay, who do we need in this role? Like who's going to fit the
Yeah.
team culture? Who's going to complement my weaknesses, that type of thing. And so I think it's something that starts with that self-awareness part and then
Yeah.
continues as you move forward.
Absolutely, Ken. Something that I know we've seen in our industry a lot is a hiring manager will send you a job description and it's just generic head of ops, head of sales. How would you advise a hiring team or hiring manager or even the founder themselves to first kind of break down what they're actually looking for to transition into that job description?
Unfortunately, with job descriptions, Annika, they have to fit the masses, right? It's sort of one size fits
Yeah.
all. There's not a lot of here's what the team is like and here's what the culture's like and here's
Okay.
but in the leader's eyes, and I'm talking about the hiring manager's eyes, like they should have kind of an avatar of what they're looking for. And what I mean by that, I use this. Everyone understands darts. I think it's like a worldwide game, right? Everyone
Yeah.
understands darts. And if you think about a dartboard, you think about the center of a dartboard, and I'm talking about the center of the center, right? You have a couple of different centers in a dartboard.
Yeah.
The center of the center is the target, right? If you're aiming for a bullseye. Now, just outside of there, there's sort of close, like there's the next level bullseye, and then there's kind of the high scoring inner ring and stuff like that. But when I think about hiring, I think about what I try to get our clients to talk about, and what I tried to do when I was in corporate leadership is at the center of that bullseye, who do I need on my team? You know,
Mm.
who are they personally? Who are they professionally? What resume do they have? How do they
Mm.
lead? How are they going to fit into the team? Are they somebody ramping up in their career? Or are they more plateaued and we're looking for someone to maybe come in and give us some wisdom? All of those things that I can't put in a job description still need to be clear in my mind's eye. Do you know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
that doesn't mean we're going to hit the bullseye every time. And sometimes we realize in the hiring process that what we were looking for was maybe different, than what we ended up with. Not because we sacrificed or settled, But because by going through that process, we saw some traits and things that we really liked that we hadn't even thought about yet. But still going into it with a plan of like, here's where we are, here's what we need at this stage is really, really critical.
Yeah. On this topic of job descriptions, something came to my mind. I think we so often see it as the candidate is being chosen for the job, but in many ways, the candidate is also choosing where they want to work. How would you advise, leaders, founders to also be proactive about making themselves and positioning themselves as a place where people want to work? What sort of things should they be posting, saying to make sure that they're not selling themselves, but aligning themselves with candidates that will be a fit for them?
Great question. It shocks me that anyone in a position of, if you think about it, companies advertise products all the time or services all the time, but they sometimes do a really lousy job of advertising to candidates of here's who we are and what we are all about. Like, what's the vision? And
Mhm.
I notice that when we do intake calls, sometimes with our clients, where I'll say, hey, well, why do people come here? Just why do they want to work for you? It's a pretty basic question that I think all leaders, and I don't care if this is your first big hire or you're, in a company with 50,000 employees, you need to be able to answer that question at a local level, right? At a local level. So, here's what it's going to look like. Here's what the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, here's what a week in the life looks like. And here's why people come to work for us. I know I was doing an intake with somebody recently where, um, company size was maybe 2,000 people, something like that. It was some hires on their sales team. And it was like, well, why do
Mhm.
people want to? Well, I don't know. We sell this and we do this, and nothing very exciting about the explanation from the hiring manager. And yet, I could go out on my own and find out that their reps were paid 25% more than industry average. Their company had several awards. They were growing at a nice clip. I mean, and there was a really good story to tell, but they need to be able to tell it in the same sense as like, a company would have an elevator pitch for their product, right? Like, who are you guys and what do you do? On the hiring manager side, again, it's who are you guys and why do people want to come work for you? And every hiring manager should be able to spit that out really, really quickly. And a good place to start. Honestly, I am not big on AI in talent acquisition in certain areas, but in other
Mhm.
areas, I'm very pro AI. And in this area, I would say, hey, here's a list of our awards and our accomplishments, and here's how we're growing, and here's a link to our company page. This could all be a prompt for ChatGPT. Can you help me write a 15-second, who are we and why do people want to come to work for us? And ChatGPT can definitely help you get that done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on that note, Ken, it's something you've said to me before as well in our industry. It's not just a fit for the company, but it needs to be a fit for the candidate as well,
Yeah.
so that it ensures longevity, lower turnover, etc. So that absolutely resonates for me and it makes, a lot of sense in that space. Um, Something that you've said before, Ken, that I remember and that just came to mind as well is that hiring isn't necessarily about delegation, it's more about multiplying your leadership. I think it's something we spoke about in our episode last week. And I just want to unpack that. What does that mean for you and to you when you say that?
I think let's say you're a general manager or director of, a 200-person facility that is growing at, let's say, 15% a year, and you have 10% turnover, all of which would be good stats. 10% turnover is low, 15% growth is good. So if I go 15% growth on 200 people, means you have 30 new people coming in if headcount is going to follow revenue, right? So you're going to have 30 people you're going to hire a year. Plus, you're going to have 10% turnover, which is really low. So I'm being conservative here. That's another 20 people. So that means you have 50 new hires coming on board into your facility a year based on those numbers. The GM can't own the entire interview process, right? In that scenario. Yeah, they absolutely can't. But the GM can own the process. They can't be in the process, but they can own the process, meaning here's what the candidate experience is going to be. And yes, I am going to pop my head into one of their first interviews and just say hello and introduce myself. And I'm going to make sure that the people on my team understand this vision of who we are and why people come to work for us. I'm going to make sure that there is a defined hiring process with clear steps and that we're following up with the candidates, right? We could do a whole separate episode on like how to run your hiring process, but those are some initial things of you being able to put your stamp on the entire thing, right? Without having to run the entire thing and using your team and effective people on your team to do it.
Yeah, Ken. That also brings me to this idea of hiring proactively versus reactively. What are some of the costs, right? Now I've got a problem, I need someone to solve it, and I'm hiring reactively as opposed to proactively. What are some of the costs that could come with that decision?
I think
Or
we
lack
get
of getting
hasty. Yeah, I
it?
think we all get hasty when we're under pressure.
Mhm.
I don't know if you have the term down there in South Africa, like beer goggles, but beer goggles are when
Yeah.
people start looking better at the end of the night when you're drinking beers. And it's that kind of thing. It's like, oh my God, we have this open spot. I have this pressure. There's a sales territory or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden that candidate that was very, very average a couple of weeks ago starts looking a lot better. And so you start making hasty decisions based on that. And everything that we do as leaders has this like ripple effect or multiplying effect because the rest of the team sees who you hired. They think that standards are coming down. They might lower their own standards. They may if they're an A player, they might start look for a place to work that has higher standards, right? So there's all of that. That can lead to more turnover. More turnover leads to being hasty again, right? Because now you're backfilling, you're not being proactive. If you hire correctly and deliberately and you control turnover, you can always sort of have resumes in the top drawer. And what I mean by that is low turnover, strong culture. Your people will generally refer people in. You don't have a high turnover problem, so you can always be proactive. You had runner-ups from maybe the last round that were really close that you would have hired if you had more spots that you said, let's keep in touch, right? So, and once you get in that pattern where even though you're growing and you're aggressively hiring, it's almost
Yeah.
like the demand to come to work for you is higher than your need. And that is a really, really good place to be. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. Most leaders don't build organizations, they build cages, and you can't grow if everything depends on you. Whether you're a founder scaling your company or a corporate leader running a high performance team, growth starts with people. And that's why the first pillar at the Leaders Lab is building the right team. Before you scale, before you sell, before any big initiative, you need the right leaders around you. Our team has placed over 1,000 executives into Fortune 500 and fast-growing startups and supported over 75 acquisitions along the way, helping leaders create over $1 billion in enterprise value. At the Leaders Lab, we help you hire top talent, scale with confidence, and build a business or team that can thrive without you. Take the free Scale Up scorecard at theleaderslab.co or email me directly, ken@theleaderslab.co, to find out how ready your organization really is for growth. And now back to the playbook.
Yeah. That also brings me to what you just said, right? Like, I think speed is a big and how fast a hire can happen is a big thing in this industry. And what is the cost? Again, what is the cost of hiring for speed and not for alignment?
I think there needs to be this balance, right? And you have to think about the human emotion part of a hiring process, right? And let me give an example. So, let's say I'm a candidate for a job and I go in and the first interview goes amazing. They did a great job explaining that vision to me and why people come to work for them. And I did a great job answering their questions. And,
Right.
both sides indicated that like it went really well. And then it's just like crickets for a while, right? And the emotional toll of that can be very big on the candidate. It's almost like, again, going on a first date thinking it
Mhm.
went well and then like what, no text, no nothing, what's going on. And that's how we're wired, right? We're wired for connection. We thought we made a connection And then the longer it goes, that excitement starts turning into maybe fear, which actually might start turning into resentment. Like, well, if they can't get back to me within a week, then I don't want to work there anyway, that kind of thing. So there's going too fast and there's going too slow. And that's why I'm kind of going to give examples of both. Going too fast is, I think this went well. Let's just send you down the hall here. And if that one goes well, you're on. And because you got to scratch your head on a hiring process like that too. I guarantee you companies that are hasty are going to have high turnover. I guarantee you companies that take too long and don't make a decision or don't have a good process are going to lose great candidates, right? So I think whatever your hiring process is, whether it's, forced, I don't think any hiring process really should be less than a couple of steps, right? And 2 steps is very short, but that might be for temporary worker, seasonal, that kind of thing. But let's say you're at a more traditional kind of 3, 4, 5, 6 step kind of process. I'm fine with a 6 step process as long as it's run in a very efficient way. This goes back to the leader going, okay, day one, they're going to meet with our HR because that's part of what we do and that's our policy. And the GM's going to poke his or her head in and shake their hand and say hi and thank them for taking the time and all of that. And then they're going to move into their first in-depth and second in-depth. Why there needs to be, or why there is sometimes a week or 2 week gap in between these interviews is crazy. That's when you'll lose people. So I think you need to have a thorough process. I think you need to have, for key level hires, probably at least 4 steps. I would definitely do personality testing as part of that. But all of this can be done within 2-3 weeks and can be done with a high degree of communication, even if it's just a text. Hey, just want to let you know, we love you. We're just trying to get you coordinated with the VP right now. He or she's traveling this week. We'll pin it down on Monday. Just that kind of communication is critical to that process.
Yeah, Ken, I absolutely agree. And we've seen this in practice as well. And we know the importance of that communication.
Yep.
You're not the only one oftentimes trying to win that candidate over.
Right. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, you're assuming that you're the only person in town, and that's just not the case. Even if you were at the beginning, sometimes interviewing for a new job made that person excited. And then when you didn't follow up, they were like, well, now it's been made clear the things I wasn't happy about in my old job. It doesn't seem like these guys are that interested. So you are actually the one sometimes that created them looking at other places. And now you're being slow in your own process, and you've lost to a competitor that you created, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ken, you mentioned something when you were talking now about like the type of worker, sometimes it's temporary, sometimes you need someone long term. How do you, as a leader or founder, identify what type of hire you're needing at that time?
Well, I think it's constant succession planning, excuse me, and like needs assessment on the team. I typically have not done a lot of contract stuff, as you know. And I'm talking short term contract.
Yeah.
To me, if we're going to make a move, it's generally a longer move. If I'm going to do something short term, I would just hire like an agency or someone on Fiverr or Upwork for a specific time frame. Do you know what I mean? But generally, when we're bringing people on, we want them to be full time. But I think it's just constantly, again, assessing the needs of the team. When is it happening? I think people make the mistake, especially on the sales side, of when our sales get to X, then I'll add more people to the sales team, as an example. And it's like, but you need more people on. You always need the people are going to drive the revenue. The revenue are not going to drive the people. And so there obviously has to be this mix of cash flow, but generally people overestimate how fast their revenue is going to grow and underestimate how quickly they'll need people to help it.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. So now I've gone through this process, I've won the candidate over, we're aligned, and they're starting. What would you suggest is a good starting operating cadence between the hiring, the founder slash leader and this new hire? I think so often the new hire might feel like they're being micromanaged, right? Because the founder slash leader is still wanting their hands in there. They still want to get involved. How do you suggest that this plays out? Is it one-on-ones? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Depends on the size of the operation, depends on the position, and it depends on that position's relationship to the founder or leader in an enterprise organization that hired them, right? So, give you an example. Founder hires a chief revenue officer. They're probably meeting every day, at least over Zoom or something, right? Like that's one position. Enterprise manager at a director or VP level hires a sales manager. They're not meeting every day, but they've got, maybe a weekly check-in for 15 minutes, right? So I think you've got to find that balance depending on where someone's at in their career, how much time they need. A new sales rep needs guidance every day. And when I say new, I mean new, like inexperienced, right? They need guidance every day. They need a training plan. They need to know exactly where they're going, what's expected of them, and where they stand. And all of that has to be established. And if you're going to talk about standards and KPIs and things like that, it's useless if you're not measuring them and giving feedback on a consistent basis. And the less experienced someone is, the more they need feedback. If you think about it, Onika, I know you have an athletic background. It's like someone new on a team that like doesn't know the plays yet, right? Or maybe has never even played the sport yet, but they've got great ability. They've just never played that sport yet. Well, the coaches, that's not micromanaging. That's like caring for them, right? That's like, hey, we're going to work with you every day to get you caught up with the
Right.
rest of the team. Then at some point, you're going to be proficient enough to where we don't need to do that. And then at some point, you're going to be so proficient that you're going to be training others. Now, another way they can do this is by leveraging other people on the team, and that's what most people will do, right? So, as the leader in this enterprise organization, I'm going to train my team on how to train new sales reps, and I'm going to train my team on how to keep me informed of their progress and where they stand. You know what I mean? And so I think having the systems and KPIs and training plans in place in advance, so before someone even walks in the door, it's like, what does the first 30 days look like? What does the first 90 days look like? And all of that is
Yeah.
really documented and spelled out and clear. It's something you can even talk about in the hiring process, because a lot of candidates will have that question like, hey, I've never sold in your industry before. What does that look like? Hey, don't worry about
Mm.
it. We've got a 90, great question, but you don't need to worry about it because we've got a 90-day comprehensive training plan. It's going to start with week 1 of education on our products and services, and weeks 2 through 4 of getting out in the field, and week 5 through 8 of doing your own calls, but with a senior rep kind of as your shotgun, right? Riding
Mhm.
shotgun with you in your car. And then month 3, you're going to go on your own, but you're going to get daily feedback on how it's going and where your KPIs are, right? Like just as an example.
Yeah, it just stresses the importance as well of setting the person up for success. And something that we've talked about, Ken, within, our team is you can't expect someone to do something if you've not communicated it.
Right.
And that's something that you've just touched on now, the importance of that communication.
Right.
What form should that take? Is it okay if it's verbal like this? Should it be in writing somewhere?
I think that um, I think it depends. I think if everything's in writing, like every time you talk to someone, it all seems like, don't
Yeah.
ever be yourself or let your guard down. I do think critical conversations, good or bad. Okay. I think sometimes when we hear this, it's like every time they did something wrong, it's like, no, when they're doing stuff right, like little notes in their personnel file, they don't need to be signed by both parties. It's more of almost like a journal of how this person's doing. I had a
Yeah.
boss once that gave me some really good advice. I was at a director level. I was in visiting a GM, and this was probably the second or third visit in a row with that GM where he was telling me about the same person being a problem, right? Uh, it's saying all the things that you say when someone's really gone south with your culture, right? So, hey, they're kind of a cancer. They're influencing other people. They're bad mouthing the organization. I don't think they want to be here. And I kind of talked through this with the GM to the point where it kind of was starting to make sense in my mind. We might want to let this person go. And I had a boss, and he said, "This is early in my career, and I'm really glad that he gave me this advice early in my career." And it wasn't even advice; it was an action that he gave me to do. And he said, "Hey, no problem. I understand." He said, "Go get their personnel file." And I went
Okay.
like, I haven't even looked at that yet. You know what I mean? Like I've just been like listening to this GM because in the personnel file, you've got their performance reviews. You should have these little touch base moments in between the performance reviews, correspondence back and forth, how they're doing, maybe a monthly sit down on how their
Yeah.
numbers are and a recap or summary of that. And none of that stuff was in there. And their last performance review, literally, if you just read it and you were a third party, you'd be like, it sounds almost like they should have been promoted. And it was just
Wow.
such a good lesson because it was grossly inappropriate to even talk about them being gone. Number one. Number two, it would have been grossly unfair because the
Hmm.
feedback that they had been given, at least the formal feedback, was all like, hey, you're awesome. And turn a couple of dials and you're probably going to get promoted. You know what I mean? And so um, it was just a really good lesson. And so to me, anything that's going to significantly shift the direction, good or bad. So let's say, Onika, you had a average performance review last December, but then by March, you were really doing some impressive things. Your numbers had gone way up. You had placed more whatever. Maybe I make a note of that. You know, maybe hey, Onika and I had a one-on-one today. Her numbers have trending up significantly so that by the time we get to the next performance review, we're aligned, right? We know that
Yeah.
nothing's a surprise. Everything's trending in the right direction. Part of that whole conversation was that performance reviews, disciplinary action, any of that, it should never be a surprise. It should always
Mhm.
be something
Like
that's,
that.
yeah, this is just the result, good or bad, of an ongoing dialogue or conversation.
Yeah. And with that dialogue and conversation being ongoing, how often should leaders be having that fixed, we're doing a review kind of setup? How often is it often enough to be effective and to ensure that everyone's still aligned?
I believe everyone should have a full semi-annual performance review. I know some people feel like once someone's been on the team long enough, you can stretch that out to annually. But I'm thinking just to touch base on like goals and what are they after and how are they progressing. I think you owe it to them, and I think that's something that you just have to make time for. Now, depending on where they are, and again what they're being groomed for, or what needs to be improved, now there could be all kinds of intervals in between those full performance reviews, right? So if someone's struggling, it might be like, hey, we're going to meet every day and kind of talk about where you're at, where your numbers are, where you need to be, what your activity is, just quickly, right? Just to make sure we're on track. And I want to give you any tools you need, any support you need. So literally, you could be meeting daily, you could be meeting monthly, or weekly. I think with your key direct reports, you should be touching base weekly. It doesn't need to be formal. It can just be like, hey, what's up? Tell me about your week. How's everything going? Nothing that's necessarily documented because there might not be anything worth documenting in that conversation, but it's just staying connected and staying on top of things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important to always keep in mind, as you navigate that space.
For
And
sure.
again, I've thrown a bunch of questions at you today.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for you, answering this, not only for me, but anyone else listening as well. And the last question I have for you is, given everything we've spoken about now, what's one hard truth that you wish more leaders understood about this transition of realizing that at some point I need to take a step back?
If you're holding on, if you're saying things like, there's no one that can do this, you know, there are billions of people in the world. The idea that any of us are indispensable is ridiculous in any part of our business, in any part of what we do. Um, and it's fed by our ego. And so I would say the biggest thing is if you have thoughts like that, and maybe they came from trying and failing. I understand, like, oh, I put someone in here and they stunk. And then I did. Well, maybe you didn't do some of the stuff we talked about in terms of painting the vision, hiring the right person. Maybe you hired out of expediency instead of, truly focusing on what you needed. Um, just because we didn't do something right or it didn't go well, or maybe we just got a curveball out of left field doesn't mean you were on the wrong path. If you don't do it, if you don't put your ego aside and figure out who those people are who can do everything that you do equal to or even better than you're already doing it, then you will just forever probably be at the level. You might find some little operational efficiencies and get a little bit better, but you're not going to scale in any kind of meaningful capacity. And what's interesting, Onika, is if you think about like the career path of someone in a large company, right, that works for someone else. So I'm not talking about founders right now, but talking about, let's say someone goes in as a management trainee with a large company and then they become a sales rep. So still individual contributor. Then they move into, let's say, a sales manager role. So this is their first time actually having direct reports. Yeah. Well, to get out of that spot, they have to be good at finding, training, and developing another leader, unless someone does it for them. Every now and then, they're just like, hey, we got someone else on the team, but usually it's got to be you. At every level, I see people get stuck because their inability to do that at the next level. So as a sales manager, if I want to become, let's say the next level is a director, I now have to be good at finding a sales manager, right? And training and developing a sales manager. And at a director level, if I want to become a senior director or a VP, I've got to be good now at finding directors and training people from that sales. And your agreed to the degree, I guess I should say, of which you can do that will dictate how far you're going to move up in an operation, not solely, but that combined with, your core capabilities and understanding of financials and some of the other things. But I can tell you this, your inability to do that, that is where your career will plateau. You will go no further until you learn how to develop leaders at each level that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, that's amazing, Ken. Very powerful reminder for leaders out there.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Onika. Good to see you. Guys, I promise less of me, maybe some guests coming on very soon. We got several booked coming up, and we look forward to catching you guys again next week. See ya. That's it for this episode of The Playbook by the Leaders Lab. Thanks for spending some time with us. We'd love it if you would subscribe, share the show, and leave a quick rating and review. Your feedback helps us grow and it helps more leaders and founders join the conversation. If you'd like to talk more about hiring, scaling, or selling your business, please email me, ken@theleaderslab.co, or connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll be back soon with more strategies you can put to work today. I'm Ken Eslick with Onika Kwacha. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week in The Playbook.